Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to our TikTok about ticks and disease and tick prevention. So we want to thank you for watching us today, and we'll be talking about ticks and the risks they pose to wildlife rehabilitators who might come into contact with them while handling wildlife. A quick introduction about us. We are members of the Veterinary Entomology Lab in the Department of Entomology at Penn State University. We conduct research at the intersection of entomology and wildlife. So we are answering questions about vector-host relationships so that we can design or improve methods to control arthropod pests that affect humans and wildlife. I'm Jesse Evans. I work as a research assistant in VEL, and I've also been a volunteer at Center Wildlife Care for the last 4 years. I help out on a lot of research in the lab relating to wildlife disease and parasitology.
And I'm Karen Poe. I'm currently a postdoctoral scholar in the lab, and I study a lot of different topics such as tick behavior and disease ecology.
There is one solid fact that I want to confirm, and that is tick bite risk is increasing. We are constantly seeing the spread of ticks to different regions of the country. Not only are the invasive tick populations emerging, increasing in size and dispersing, but native ticks are exploding in population and range as well. This means that more captured wildlife will have ticks, and risk of tick bites and tick-borne pathogens to rehabilitators is ever worsening. At the same time, rehabilitators have the unique opportunity to keep an eye out for invasive new species of ticks, while keeping track of known tick populations on wildlife they receive. Pennsylvania has more than 20 tick species infesting everything from bats and lizards to birds and bobcats. We'll only be able to touch on a few of them today, including the 3 that you see on screen right now. But knowing more about your local ticks can help you better protect yourself or your animals and better understand your risks. This is because tick-borne diseases are often species-specific, so knowing what species you are dealing with will inform your response to its bite and your control tactics. Why should you care? Well, wildlife rehabilitators are constantly interacting with compromised and often very dirty wild animals, which increases their risk of picking up ticks. I know during my time at Center Wildlife, I have seen hundreds of ectoparasites on animals and picked ticks, lice, and flat flies off of me on more than one occasion. And I'm sure all of you have equally disgusting experiences as well. Rehabbers are also in the unique position to constantly have their fingers on the pulse of tick behavior and prevalence in their local area. Rehabbers may be the first to notice a new or emerging wildlife parasite or an increase in zoonotic diseases. Also, the more you know, the better you can protect every living thing at your facility, including your staff. And now I'm going to hand it over to Karen, and she's going to give us a little talk about tick biology and tick ID.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about tick biology, and we're going to start with their general size. So ticks come in a variety of different sizes, but a good way to visualize them and how tiny they can be is to consider a poppy seed muffin. And so pathogen-carrying ticks can be as small as a poppy seed, making it incredibly hard to spot them on your skin, or even embedded in your own skin. And so this muffin actually has 5 ticks hidden on it. So I'll give you a second to see if you can spot them. All right, so did you find them? So they're circular red on the screen, and I hope we got the point across that ticks can be incredibly small, but the overall size of ticks will depend on a couple of things. The challenge with tick identification is that ticks will look very different depending on the species, the sex of the tick, the life stage of the tick, and its blood feeding status. So females are typically larger than males. Females will also have a different anatomy to males as well. So both male and female ticks will have what's known as a scutum, which kind of looks like a shield on their back. So the scutum is also known as the dorsal shield. Females have a much smaller scutum, extending to only about halfway down her body, and males will have a full scutum covering its entire back. And can anyone guess why? Well, the scutum is incredibly rigid, and so the female actually needs a lot of room to drink more blood so that she has enough protein and fats to make her eggs. And the scutum covers her whole back. She can't expand as much. And so as you can see in the bottom picture on the left, females can have or can get very large after feeding, growing to over 3 to 4 times their original body size. Life stages will also differ in appearance. Every tick will start as an egg, the egg will hatch, and then you have what's called the larval stage. In this stage, the ticks will only have about 6 legs, and this is the only stage to have 6 legs. Both the nymphal and adult stages will have 8 legs, and then the adults will generally look larger than the nymphs. At the adult stage, it'll be easiest to identify the tick because most identification keys are made for adults. But as you can see, adults will have different patterns or nations on their back, and we often use those to identify some ticks along with other structures on their body. And the best option is to learn the major tick species in your area very well. So if you are doing surveillance, you can identify the ticks that you're picking up. So going over the life cycle of ticks, just remember the 2-3-4 rule. Ticks that we are interested in will generally have a 2-year life cycle, will require 3 hosts to feed on, and have 4 life stages. There are other ticks with different life cycles, but we won't be covering those today. So eggs will hatch in the spring as larvae, and the larvae will feed on a small mammal, as well as birds, sometime during the summer, and then eventually they'll overwinter. Once the next spring approaches in the second year, the larvae will molt as nymphs and feed on a small or large animal through the summer. The nymphs will then molt into adults, and adults will continue to feed for a third time sometime in the fall, and then the females will lay their eggs, where the cycle repeats in the spring when eggs hatch. So something else to understand is that this cycle does play a very large role in tick-borne disease risk. Ticks will take their first blood meal as larvae, and this is where they're likely to pick up a disease-causing pathogen. There are a few pathogens that are passed from mother to egg, but these are a lot rarer. So when we worry about tick-borne diseases, we are typically focused more on the nymphal and adult stages, which are highlighted in red. Taking a look at the seasonal activity of black-legged ticks, which transmits the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, we see that our biggest risk for encountering ticks are between May through late September. Now, this seasonality does shift based on yearly weather patterns as well as location. So for example, Pennsylvania distributions will be a little bit different from the distributions we might find on the coast of Maine. So knowing when ticks in your area are most active can be important in understanding the timing of tick burdens on admitted wildlife and for determining the best times and ways to protect yourself. So let's quickly go over some ticks that you might commonly run into while in Pennsylvania. These images come from the University of Rhode Island Tick Encounter Resource Center, which can be a great site to help you identify ticks you find on yourself and to learn more about the ticks. We're only going to touch on a few of the most common and well-studied ticks today because there are just way too many to memorize and ID in just one presentation. Here is one of the most common ticks and probably the one you recognize best. This is the black-legged tick, also known as the deer tick, and its scientific name is Ixodes scapularis. As you can see, the black-legged tick is named for its black legs. So as scientists, we're not exactly the most creative when it comes to naming things. So adult females will overall look brown and have dark legs and a dark scutum, and the males will have a dark scutum. There are many other Ixodes ticks you might encounter on animals in your care, including the squirrel tick or Ixodes marxi and the groundhog tick Ixodes cookii. But they can be hard to identify and they are a lot less aggressive biters of humans. So here's another species. This is an Amblyomma americanum, commonly known as the Lone Star tick. And this species is rounder than the black-legged ticks, and you can see the ornamentation on the female, but not the male. So female adults will have a single white spot on their backs, which is the easiest way to identify this species. The adult male, though, doesn't have a very interesting pattern on its back. And compared to the black-legged tick, the Lone Star tick will be just a little bit larger. Lone Star ticks aren't uncommon in Pennsylvania, but they are a lot rarer in northern counties. So the next species is Dermacentor variabilis, which is also known as the American dog tick. So these are easily recognizable by that bright patterning on their scutum. And as you can see, the males are more ornate than the females. You can easily tell them apart based on the size and the pattern of their scutum. And this tick is also one of the larger ticks you might encounter. And yet another species, Rhipicephalus sanguineus, or the brown dog tick, is shown on the screen. Although more common in southern states, the brown dog ticks are frequently found to infest homes, kennels, as well as animal pens, making them an important tick for rehabbers to recognize. This species can complete its entire life cycle indoors, which means you should probably keep an eye out for this tick at your facilities. These ticks will also look reddish brown and have an elongated body. They will also have a black pattern on their backs, and they can sometimes be hard to distinguish from black-legged ticks, especially the adult males. The easiest way to identify this tick is by looking at the mouth parts. So for all ticks, the mouth parts are attached to the rest of the body by a structure called the basis capitulum, which is highlighted in red. For the brown dog tick, it will have a hexagonal shaped basis capitulum, which flares out at the bottom. Now for a new species in Pennsylvania. This is Haemaphysalis longicornis, or the Asian longhorn tick. Asian longhorn ticks are an invasive species in the United States, with the first reports coming out in 2017, but they could have been in the United States for up to a decade prior due to misidentification. There have been a few reports of this tick in Pennsylvania, but they can reproduce quickly and populations can increase at a rapid rate. These are mainly threats to livestock. However, wildlife such as deer may be appropriate hosts for these ticks. In terms of their appearance, Asian longhorn ticks look a lot like brown dog ticks, but the best way to distinguish between these two ticks is by looking at their mouth parts. The bottom edges of their mouth parts flare outwards and they come to a sharp point, but this can be a little bit hard to see without a microscope. And so this tick can be mistaken for the brown dog tick, but their mouth parts are different from the brown dog tick in that the mouth parts for the Asian longhorn tick are flared at the bottom, while the basis capitulum is actually square. And you probably won't find the Asian longhorn ticks at your facility for quite some time, but being able to recognize them and look out for them can help us track their expansion in the United States, which will help everyone in the long run. I also want to note that there is another Haemaphysalis species called the rabbit tick, and these are commonly found on rabbits, and the rabbit tick will have very similar mouth parts, and they differ in only one part of the mouth parts from the Asian longhorn tick. So if you find a Haemaphysalis tick, it could be a rabbit tick, but regardless, you should send your ticks to a professional identification lab to properly identify the tick. So now I know that was probably a lot of ticks that we kind of just breezed through, but you don't have to be perfect at identification right away. The point that matters here is that it's important to be familiar with your local ticks because different species will have different behaviors, which can lead to different control methods. And I also want to emphasize that you're not required to know how to identify ticks to species. We have professionals for that. You can send them to the Penn State Identification Lab, and we will have their contact information at the end of this presentation. So each tick species transmits different disease-causing pathogens, but more than one species may be capable of transmitting the same pathogen. And these pathogens can be dangerous to the animals you care for, but they are also a concern for you and your staff as well. The way that tick-borne illnesses present can differ depending on the species or even the individual, but in humans, they typically begin the same way. You'll have general flu-like symptoms, some muscle cramps, and the occasional headaches. And then the diseases will progress to much more life-threatening symptoms, especially if left untreated. And so I've listed here the common tick-borne diseases for humans and animals in Pennsylvania. We're going to come back to this, but first, let's talk about tick-borne diseases more generally. Tick-borne diseases all have very different life cycles, but they generally follow a similar path. So let's go over a few terms that are commonly used to describe that general path. So the first term is vector, which in our case would be the tick that transmits the pathogen to the host. So the vector must be infected with the pathogen first before transmitting the pathogen to a new host. And to be infected, they'll typically feed on a host that has the pathogen. Some pathogens are transmitted from mother to offspring, but none of the common pathogens in Pennsylvania are transmitted in this way. So I've been saying the word pathogen a lot, and it basically means a microorganism that causes clinical symptoms and signs of disease. These come in different forms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites. And it's an important distinction that vectors do not transmit diseases. Instead, vectors transmit the pathogens that cause the disease. When you hear the term reservoir, this is basically a host that serves as a source of infection as a means of sustaining the pathogen in nature. In other words, reservoirs can carry the pathogen into the next season when the vectors become more active. Reservoirs also serve the important role of amplifying the pathogen in nature prior to pathogen transmission to other hosts. Because of reservoirs, vector-borne disease control can be quite difficult since you need to worry about the vector and the animal reservoirs that carry the pathogen. Finally, we have what's called the dead end or the accidental host. These types of hosts can be infected with the pathogen, but they cannot transmit the pathogen to a new host or a vector, typically because they presumably don't produce a high enough level of the pathogen in their blood. So as an example, let's take a look at the Lyme disease cycle. Ticks acquire the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, Borrelia burgdorferi, and they pick it up from reservoir hosts like mice. The tick then carries those pathogens as they progress to different life stages. And when they bite a dead-end host, like a canid or a human, the tick can pass on that pathogen, causing Lyme disease in that host. So now we return to this slide and we can better understand why tick-borne disease prevention is so important for wildlife rehabbers. The groups of animals pictured here are only those that display signs of these diseases, but the list of animals that can carry and serve as a reservoir host of pathogens extends far beyond this. Interacting with this variety of wildlife daily greatly increases the risk of encountering the zoonotic diseases they carry. So then the question remains, how do we prevent tick-borne diseases when working with wildlife, which is what Jesse will now discuss.
All right, so there are several methods to preventing tick-borne illnesses in ourselves, but we prefer a combined approach. I have here a 5-step process that is easy and effective for preventing tick bites. The steps include know before you handle, dress to protect, and repel, review, remove. So we'll start with know before you handle. So this includes know when you handle, which means that tick activity changes with the seasons. They're less active in winter months, but emerge and quest throughout spring and summer. This means that highest tick activity and prevalence in some areas of Pennsylvania lines up perfectly with baby season, which you all know is the busiest time of the year. This can be a problem when there is so much else to worry about, but simple protection methods like clothing choice and repellents can ease your anxieties. It should also be pointed out that some ticks, like the black-legged tick, are extremely active in fall and early winter. Black-legged ticks vector the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, which is the most prevalent tick-borne disease in Pennsylvania by a large margin. So after baby season ends, don't let your guard down. And as Karen mentioned before, these cycles do change depending on locality. So just know the seasonal activity in your area. So know what you handle. That means being able to associate a host to its tick, which is a hard skill to learn, but one that can be very valuable when understanding your risks and diagnosing tick-borne diseases in animals in your care. Black-legged ticks are ubiquitous, infesting nearly every animal from amphibians to birds to mammals. But other ticks like Lone Star ticks and American dog ticks can be choosier. Ticks will generally prefer certain regions of the animal as well. We do a lot of field research with mice, and during our field investigations, we commonly found black-legged ticks on mouse ears, toes, and chins. So knowing where the ticks like to hide on the animals can help you better clean those areas or avoid those regions if you don't want to get the ticks on you. Don't forget to sanitize your hands and check yourself for ticks between handling different animals so as to avoid carrying ticks from one animal to another. When you are in the facility handling animals, you should dress to protect. This comes in 2 stages, dress to suppress and dress to assess. So dress to suppress means wearing long sleeves and hats and tucking your pants into your socks, your shirt into your pants, and your sleeves into your gloves. This will reduce the amount of skin exposed to ticks. Dress to assess means wearing light, solid colored clothing so that you can identify the ticks when they are on you. Here you can see how I tucked my pants into my socks to create a tight seal that ticks can't get through. If you look closely enough, you can also see the black tape I used to tighten that seal in the second photo. All loose cuffs should be tucked in this way so that ticks have a harder time accessing your exposed skin. You may also use tape like I did to make that seal tighter and even more impenetrable. All right, so dress to assess. Here we have two squares representing patterned and solid colored clothing. The one on the left is camo clothing, which is a very popular choice in Pennsylvania. And the one on the right is a solid light colored outfit. I have put black-legged ticks on each square. On which one can you count the most ticks? I'll give you guys a second to count. I'm sure a lot of you saw this coming, but they actually have the same amount of ticks in the exact same spots. They are much harder to identify, however, on the patterned clothing. When you are working, solid, light-colored clothing will help you better identify ticks that have climbed onto you. Patterns make ectoparasites hard to find and hard to catch before they have a chance to bite you. That brings us to repel. I'm going to suggest one repellent today because though others have been extensively tested on humans and domestic animals, there isn't a lot of information confirming their safety in close contacts with various groups of wild animals like a lot of rehabbers will work with on a daily basis. So I'll be talking about permethrin because it is cheap, it's ubiquitous, and it's relatively inert when dry. Permethrin comes as a spray or as a dip. It's used on clothes, is odorless, and protects from ticks and mosquitoes and various other ectoparasites for up to 6 weeks, for up to 6 washes, excuse me. You can buy pre-treated permethrin clothing as well, which will last longer to repel ticks and mosquitoes. And this will depend on the company that manufactures the clothing and how they embed permethrin into the fabric. It is expensive when compared to treating your clothes yourself, but easier, and treating your clothes yourself will require more work from you. If you do want to treat your clothes yourself, it's not too hard. You just have to buy a 0.5% permethrin solution as a dip or as a spray, and then you can follow the directions on the product to treat any clothing you might wear while working. You might want to be careful with this if you have a cat, because wet permethrin can be dangerous for them, and that includes wild cats like bobcats as well. It causes seizures and may result in a veterinary emergency, so treat away from pets, then bring the clothing indoors once it is dry. At this point, it will be safe. And here is a short video showing the effect of permethrin treatment on the movement of ticks of a piece of clothing. So if you look on the one on the right with the red tape, it has been treated and it started with 5 ticks on it, 3 have dropped off, whereas the one on the left that has remained untreated started with 5 ticks, still has 5 ticks. That brings us to review. When you finish working with the animals, check your clothing and skin for ticks. Continue this investigation in the shower, where the water will work to flush away unattached ticks and other active parasites that may remain on your body, like fleas and lice. Ticks are small and they can fit into tight and hard to reach crevices of your body, so make sure you are checking every part of your body, including under your arms, in your hair, in your belly button, behind your joints, and yes, even your groin. Just, you have to be smarter than the average tick. Remove all your clothing before you shower and put it in the dryer on the high setting for 5 to 12 minutes. The heat and low humidity will kill the ticks. But if you don't have time to wait on your dryer or you want to do a real quick go over, you can run over your clothes with a lint roller to remove the ticks you might have missed during your tick check. If you find an attached tick, use tweezers, not alcohol, not fire, not Vaseline. Use tweezers to remove attached ticks. And to remove attached ticks, you want to do it as soon as you find them. What you'll do is you'll grab the tick as close to the body as you can, and you're going to pull straight up. Do not twist. Then wash the area with soap and water, or you can rub it down with alcohol as well. This also applies to ticks that you find on animals and wish to remove. If you grab the tick by the body, you can force out the disease-causing pathogens that you are trying to prevent from entering your body. So you want to grab it from as close to the mouth parts as possible and avoid above that. Here is a short video by Karan Rashan from the University of Manitoba. She's going to be describing how to remove a wood tick.
So the reason you don't want to really hurt the tick is actually that the tick is feeding on you and salivating. And so when you burn the tick, it salivates even more. Pretty much you're scaring it and it just goes bleh into you. And that's what you want to avoid, because in the saliva you have potential pathogens. So you want to avoid that. The safe way to remove ticks is to take your tweezers, and you want to go as close to the skin as possible. And you want to hold on to your tick, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to hold on and you're going to pull straight up. Slowly, steadily. You don't want to twist, you don't want to jerk. You just want very steadily to hold on to your tick like this and pull up. Like that. Now you have your tick. The mouth parts are there. People worry about not having the head stay into you. They don't really have a head to speak of. All they put in there is little mouth parts. They're sinking their teeth into you. And so the teeth, when you remove them that way, you can see them. They're right there. The place where you had your tick, always a good idea to disinfect with alcohol and to monitor the area just to make sure wood ticks don't transmit Lyme disease, so you wouldn't have a problem with that. That said, they are a little critter that lives in the wild, and there could be some kind of bacteria, or even just because there's a hole in your skin, you could have staph infection or anything like that. So just clean the area with alcohol or soap and water and keep an eye on it.
All right, and those tips also work for animals in your care as well. So now I'm going to turn it back to Karen, and she's going to summarize some points, and she's going to close out this presentation for us.
All right, thanks, Jessie. So if you want a summary of the biggest takeaways, the first thing is you want to defend yourself against ticks by wearing clothes that are light in color and have long sleeves, and to wear long pants, and also consider treating your clothes with permethrin or another CDC recommended repellent. The second point is don't forget that ticks can be extremely small, only measuring to be about the size of a seed. Nymphal ticks are about the size of a poppy seed, and an adult tick is about the size of a sesame seed. And both of these stages can transmit pathogens, so remember to do your tick checks regularly. And then finally, if you experience flu-like symptoms, see a doctor and relay any recent activities, including if you're a wildlife rehabilitator who may have had animals that had ticks on them. Even if you don't recall a bite, you could still have a tick-borne pathogen because ticks are incredibly sneaky biters. If you find a tick on yourself and it hasn't attached yet, or if you find a bunch of ticks on your animals, send them to the Penn State Insect Identification Laboratory that is run by Dr. Michael Scavarla, and he can identify those ticks for you. If you find a tick attached to you, you can also send it to the tick lab at East Stroudsburg University to get the tick tested for any pathogens. And this service that's provided by East Stroudsburg University is free for Pennsylvania residents. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to contact us at our emails, or you can follow us on Twitter. Thank you again for attending our talk, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.